Since I moved into this house, I've always had an uncomfortable feeling about the basement. It wasn't anything rational, just a slight unease, a sort of discomfort that intensified whenever I went down there. The basement was old, with damp, cracked walls, lit only by a weak bulb that flickered as if it were about to burn out. The concrete floor was covered in a thin layer of dust, but none of that seemed unusual. It was just an ordinary basement, or at least that's what I tried to tell myself. It all started with a low, almost inaudible sound. It seemed like the creaking of wind slipping through a crack somewhere, and I tried to ignore it, telling myself that the house was old and rustic, so it was normal to hear those kinds of noises. But as the days went by, the sound grew louder. At night, when the house was silent, I could hear that noise coming from the basement, as if it were a voice, a whisper so faint that it was impossible to understand the words, yet clear enough to make me uncomfortable. Some nights, I swear I heard my own name being called, drawn out slowly, as if someone or something were calling me from a distant place, echoing through the cold basement walls. I hesitated for a long time before deciding to go down and investigate. I knew something was wrong, but the fear of confirming my suspicions was too great. One night, however, after waking up suddenly to the sound of a low, disturbing laugh coming from down there, I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. I grabbed a flashlight and began descending the stairs slowly, heart pounding, each step echoing through the basement as if I were heading towards something unknown. The basement light was dim, almost useless. Trembling, I shone the flashlight around, trying to illuminate every corner. Shadows danced as I moved, and the air felt denser, heavy with a cold dampness that seemed to seep into my bones. And when I reached the bottom of the stairs, I realized that the sound had stopped. The silence was oppressive, the kind that feels like it's waiting for something I couldn't yet identify. As I moved, I felt as though something were watching me. The presence was so tangible that I could almost touch it, but there was nothing there, only the darkness closing in around me. Even as I tried to stay calm, a part of me screamed to leave as quickly as possible. When I turned to go back up the stairs, I heard the whisper again, this time clearer, as if it were right next to my ear. "Don't go!" The voice was cold, emotionless, sending such a chill through me that I nearly dropped the flashlight. I ran up the stairs and closed the basement door behind me, locking it tightly, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. That night was rough. I barely slept, afraid that at any moment that voice would start calling me again. The days went by, and the whisper continued. Some nights it was just a distant murmur, almost imperceptible, but on other nights it grew louder, more insistent. I began to feel as if it were trying to lure me down, calling to me from the basement, and I fought against the impulse to go. One early morning, as I was trying to sleep, I heard soft footsteps on the stairs, as if someone were slowly climbing. I pulled the blanket over myself, my heart pounding, until the footsteps stopped and silence took over again. The next morning, I gathered my courage and decided to put cameras in the basement, thinking they might help me understand what was happening. During the day, I reviewed the footage, but everything seemed normal. However, one night, as I watched the recordings, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Shortly after I had closed the door, a shadow appeared in the corner of the basement, like someone standing there, staring directly into the camera. The shadow stood motionless for a few seconds and then disappeared, leaving nothing but silence. That was enough to convince me that something beyond my control was going on down there. Despite my fear, I decided to go into the basement one last time. I grabbed the flashlight and a knife just in case I needed to defend myself. Even though a part of me knew that whatever it was, a knife wouldn't help. I descended the stairs slowly, and as I reached the bottom, I felt the air grow heavier, the atmosphere darker, as if the darkness itself were surrounding me. At the far end of the basement, I heard the whisper again, but this time it was different. It sounded like it was coming from all corners at once, echoing in my mind, as if the darkness itself were whispering to me. And then I heard it clearly. "You shouldn't be here." The flashlight began to flicker, and in the brief moment when everything went dark, I felt a cold touch on my shoulder. It wasn't just a sensation. It was real. Something or someone was there with me. When the light returned, I quickly turned around, but there was nothing. The whisper, however, continued, getting louder, drawing nearer, until it became a muffled scream, like a voice trapped, full of pain and anger. I ran toward the stairs, but halfway up, I stumbled and fell, feeling the cold intensify around me, as though invisible hands were trying to pull me back. I screamed for help, but my voice seemed to disappear into the darkness. Finally, I managed to stand up and run out of the basement, locking the door behind me. After that night, I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I moved out shortly afterward, but I still hear the whisper when I'm alone, especially at night, echoing in the walls of my mind like a dark warning, a reminder that there are things in this world that should never be disturbed. Shortly after I moved into the house, I noticed it had a spacious basement, perfect for storing things I didn't use often. But from the very first day, the basement felt unsettling. The air down there seemed colder, and the silence was heavier, as if the space held a secret. Initially, I brushed off the feeling, thinking it was just my imagination, given that I was new to the place. Over time, however, that unease grew, especially when I began to hear inexplicable sounds, like faint footsteps coming from the basement in the dead of night. I told myself they were just house noises, wood expanding or contracting with temperature changes. For precaution and to better understand what was happening, I decided to install security cameras in the basement. They were basic cameras, just so I could monitor the space without having to go down constantly. During the first week, nothing strange showed up, but I kept hearing those faint footsteps, the muffled sounds of small movements that somehow seemed to evade capture on the cameras. Then, everything changed one cold night around 3 in the morning. I was reviewing the day's footage when something caught my eye. In the corner of the video, there was a small figure, almost imperceptible, but clearly that of a child. The figure stood motionless in the middle of the basement, its face hidden in shadow. There was absolutely no reason for a child to be there. I zoomed in, trying to get a clearer view, but the camera lost focus whenever I tried to look at its face. It was as if the security system itself refused to show who or what was there. I spent the rest of the night awake, waiting for the figure to disappear. The next morning, I went down to the basement, trying to make sense of what I had seen, but there were no signs anyone had been there. No footprints, nothing out of place. It was as if the presence were a shadow, something that left no trace. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind, but the camera footage didn't lie. Something had indeed been captured that night. Days later, while doing a quick review of the footage, the figure appeared again in the exact same spot. This time, the child seemed to be looking directly at the camera, though expressionless, frozen in a vacant stare. Its position was disturbing. The body was slightly tilted, and the eyes, or what should have been eyes, were just dark, empty spaces, as if its face were a lifeless mask. My body went cold, and each second I looked at that figure, I felt like it was staring back at me. I began to avoid the basement. Even if it was just recorded footage, the feeling of being watched down there was unbearable. I started locking the door, as if that would prevent anything from coming up. But one night, I heard a strange sound coming from the camera monitor. A soft noise, almost like a melody, something that reminded me of a distorted lullaby. My mind froze in fear. Every part of me wanted to turn off the monitor, yet I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. The camera started glitching, as if something was interfering with the signal. The screen flickered, and each time it came back, the child appeared closer to the camera. It had moved, one step at a time, always coming closer to the lens, until finally, in one of the flashes, its face filled the screen entirely. The eyes were dark, empty voids, and its pale face held an expression of despair, or maybe anger, something hard to describe. I sat frozen, the eerie lullaby still echoing, when suddenly I heard a low, shrill laugh, so close it seemed to come from the hallway behind me. In that moment, I got up from my chair and locked my bedroom door, trying to force the image of the child's face out of my mind. The next day, I went down to the basement with as much courage as I could gather, just to make sure there was nothing there. The cold was more intense, and the air felt trapped, as if no one had breathed down there for a long time. I checked every corner, but found nothing, not even a trace of dust to suggest any presence. Despite the empty basement, I kept seeing the child in the recordings. Some nights it would appear only for a few seconds. On other nights it would remain on the screen, staring directly toward the camera, as if it knew I was watching. The situation began to affect me deeply, and sleep became almost impossible. Every creak, every sound in the silence of the night seemed to come from the basement, and I avoided looking at the monitor, dreading what I might see. The final straw came one early morning, when I heard footsteps coming up from the basement stairs, light, almost inaudible steps, but steady. I hid, hoping it would pass, but the steps stopped right outside my bedroom door. I had the distinct feeling that someone was watching me from the other side, and in a burst of courage, I opened the door quickly. There was no one there, but I felt a cold presence, something invisible, as if I had interrupted an unwanted visit. The next day, I turned off the camera and never turned it back on. To this day, I avoid going into the basement, but sometimes, even with the camera off, I feel there's something down there, waiting, a quiet presence that hides in the darkness, as if it's biding its time to reappear. Since I moved into this house, I've always had a strange feeling about the basement. There was something in it, an inexplicable presence I couldn't ignore. During the first few weeks, I avoided going down there alone, but eventually, I had to use it for storage. That's when I noticed something curious, or rather, unsettling. The basement door never stayed closed. I installed a new lock, thinking maybe the latch was old or misaligned, but it made no difference. Every time I closed the door, I'd find it open the next morning. At first, I thought maybe I was just being careless or that the weight of the basement was somehow forcing the door open. So, I decided to test it, closing the door and waiting a few minutes to see if it would open. I waited and waited, but nothing happened. However, that same night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a faint creaking echoing through the house, the sound of the basement door slowly opening. I got up, took a deep breath, and walked down the hallway. The light was dim, casting strange shadows on the walls, and when I looked at the basement door, my heart raced. It was slightly ajar, as if someone had come out of it, or worse, as if it was inviting someone to go down. I descended the steps cautiously, flashlight in hand, each step echoing in the dense darkness. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, everything seemed in place. However, the sensation that I was not alone down there was unbearable. I somehow knew there was something watching me, something I couldn't see. As the days passed, the situation only got worse. The basement door continued to open, even after I replaced the lock once more. I began locking it with padlocks, but every night, I'd hear that disturbing sound of metal creaking as the door opened. I started waking up with the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. A heavy presence I felt even in my bedroom, despite the locked door. One night, I decided I had to understand what was happening. I installed security cameras in the hallway, aimed directly at the basement door. On the first night, nothing happened, but on the second, what I saw in the recordings made my blood run cold. At 3 in the morning, the door began to open on its own, slowly, as if someone were pushing it from the inside. When the door was fully open, a faint shadow appeared in the doorway, motionless, without any clear shape, just a dark presence. It stood there for a few seconds and then vanished. The door remained open until dawn. The next morning, I went down to the basement with a stronger flashlight and a knife in hand, though I knew a knife wouldn't make a difference against something I couldn't see. When I stepped into the basement, the air was colder than ever, and there was a strange smell, a mix of dampness and decay. I checked every corner, but everything seemed normal, except for the heavy, oppressive air that made it hard to breathe. I locked the door again and went back upstairs, but the feeling of being watched lingered. That night, I woke to the sound of the door opening again, but this time, I heard soft footsteps climbing the stairs. I was paralyzed with fear, my heart racing, as I heard the steps approaching my room. The sound stopped outside my door, and I felt a cold presence on the other side. I couldn't move, unable to breathe, paralyzed by fear. What happened in the following nights was even worse. The basement door now opened every day without fail, and each time I found it open, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I began to hear whispers, as if distant voices were echoing from the basement, murmuring words I couldn't understand. One night, the whispers grew louder, as though multiple voices were whispering at once, calling out to me. I knew something was trying to lure me into the basement, but I fought the urge to go down. Yet, on the next night, I heard a different sound, something dragging along the stairs, as if someone were slowly climbing. I tried to ignore it, but the footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. In a burst of courage, I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door suddenly. The hallway was empty, but the basement door was wide open, and I knew that whatever it was waiting for me down there. The situation became unbearable. I could no longer sleep, spending my nights wide awake, terrified of hearing those footsteps or seeing the door open again. One morning, I called a friend and asked him to go to the basement with me. I explained everything, and he laughed, thinking I was exaggerating. I went down first, and as he followed me, the basement door slammed shut behind us. We both froze, and my friend stopped laughing instantly. When we tried to go back up, the door was locked. We shouted, tried to force the handle, but nothing happened. Then we heard footsteps above, as if someone were walking through the house. The lights began to flicker, and the air grew heavy, almost impossible to breathe. We heard the whispers, now much closer, as if they were all around us. Suddenly, the door opened by itself, and we ran out without looking back. My friend left the house and never returned. Since that day, I've avoided the basement at all costs. I left the door locked and pushed furniture in front of it, but I still feel that something is trying to call me back. Now, even without hearing the whispers or seeing the door open, I know that whatever is down there is still waiting patiently for someone brave or foolish enough to go down once again.